Startups get the party, startups get the party started. Startups get the party, startups get the party started. You want tech and tacos, tacos and tech, you know we got it, eh? Startups get the party, startups get the party started. Startups get the party, startups get the party started. Startups get the party, startups get the party started. You want tech and tacos, tacos and tech, you know we got it, eh?
And welcome back to the Tacos and Tech podcast. I'm your host, Neal Bloom, and I am so thrilled to have on a longtime founder, serial entrepreneur, and friend in the community, Jeremy Yamaguchi, founder and CEO of Cabana. Hey, Jeremy, thanks for being on the pod.
Hey, Neal. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's a real pleasure. I know we've been in the community together, building our own things, and more recently, hopefully helping you support build the newest thing, which is Cabana, which I'm really excited to talk about. Do you want to give us a quick high level of what Cabana is, and then we'll go dive deep into your background a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. So Cabana is the first national brand in pool service. At least that's what we aspire to build. So, if you look at most other home services verticals in the US, whether it's lawn or pest or, housekeeping or you name it, there's usually one or more scaled national player, right? There's True Green on the lawn side. There's, Orkin on the pest control side. In many cases, like multi-billion-dollar public IPO scale company. It doesn't exist in pools, despite having largely recurring revenue and non-cyclical kind of trends. There's no scaled national player, and we think no law of nature that says there can't be. So the goal with Cabana is, how do we go build that over the next decade and kind of compound to a household name in pools?
Amazing. Well, you're already making it happen, and we'll talk about that in a second. You've done this before in a few other outdoor home services verticals as well too. Right. Is this what you grew up knowing you're going to do? Where does it all start for you, Jeremy?
I mean, wow. Yeah. So I think to tell the entrepreneurial story, got to go a little further back. But, I was born and raised overseas, born in Japan, kind of grew up there for 15 years, spent a little time in East Africa, and then immigrated to the US as a 16-year-old. But entrepreneurial journey started right around 16. I graduated high school early, right when I landed in the States, and started my first business, which was a web dev and design shop. We did a lot of growth marketing, started kind of, I was originally a designer because I liked, making pretty things on my computer, and then realized, pretty things that live in hard drives that no one ever sees doesn't really serve anyone. So taught myself how to code so I could add a little more function to the form and build things that were actually useful. And then, went and kind of eventually legged into growth marketing and lead gen and built essentially a small agency in and around Southern California. And at this point, I was in my late teens, early 20s. And, things were going well, right? I was definitely making more money than 19-year-old me had ever planned on. But I was ultimately limited by the finite number of hours I had in a day as a consultant, right? Like it was tough to scale my own time. And you can charge more and more per hour, but even that's like you hit an upper boundary, right? So I was looking for something that had more natural scale to it than consulting, and found that opportunity in 2009. I went to go book a maid and realized the entire home services landscape was super offline, very low tech. Existing service providers were, you either had like Craigslist or Yelp or the Yellow Pages to go find a pro, or you could go to the big franchises like, Molly Maids or Mary Maids, and even they weren't using much in the way of software to run their business. So I was like, man, I know how to grow these things. I know how to market for them. I know how to build a software platform to kind of intermediate these transactions. And I went and built what was basically Handy, kind of like order a housekeeper through an app sort of business, just 3 years before them and fully bootstrapped. So I ran that into my early kind of mid 20s, ended up selling it 3 years later to private equity at the age of 26, 25.
Wow.
Took a week off, started Lawn Love a week later. I should definitely have taken more time in hindsight, because Lawn Love ended up being an enjoyable but long journey. I think we worked on that for over 7 years. So took a week off, started Lawn Love, raised a bunch of money, got it through YC, Scaled it over 7 years to 120 cities in 40 some states and about 7,000 techs in the field mowing lawns every day. And then sold it in 2021. Took a much longer period of time off, had a whole like meaningful sabbatical, and then started Cabana. But there's a lot of like stuff that kind of interweaves through that whole journey that I'm happy to talk about. But I did not set out to be a home services guy. I set out to be a technologist and a business builder, and mostly just like found myself in home services because it's $1 trillion a year industry and it's super low tech and massively fragmented. And frankly, there's a lot of wide open opportunity, especially if you know how to live at the intersection of building software solutions and then dealing with like very gritty blue collar problems. I think a lot of tech folks are, HBS McKinsey types who get into home services find this journey to be a trying one because of, the very human components to running these kind of field service businesses. But I've lived and breathed this for a long time. That stuff is not foreign and or, particularly troubling to me. So trying to exploit that advantage as much as possible in the things I build.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna pull back the layer a little bit here. Okay, so you took a week off of between two companies, but obviously things were already simmering enough to know what you want to do next. Like, how did you know lawn was the next area, and how did you think about building it in a different way than you did your prior one?
Yeah, so the previous business that I built was a company called Golden Shine. It was fully bootstrapped. Grew it pretty quickly. We grew it across Southern California, San Diego, Orange County, LA. And we're ranked like the 5th fastest growing privately owned company in San Diego by the Business Journal in 2013. But one of the reasons I sold that company only 3 years in is because I was able to look down the pipe and saw these enormous, very well-funded competitors start to emerge. So one of them was a company called HomeJoy that ended up raising about $40 million from Google Ventures and Andreessen NYC, run by a woman named Adora Chung. Another one was a company called Exec, run by Justin Kahn of Twitch fame. And then finally, Handy was started in kind of the Northeast Boston area by a couple of HBS guys. And they'd raised tens of millions of dollars and eventually hundreds of millions of dollars. All three of these players were extremely well capitalized, had like, in many cases, celebrity kind of status in the startup, ecosystem, very, very well-known entrepreneurs. And to a company, they were all massively like underwriting the labor economics of these businesses and subsidizing them. They were selling cleaning services for $20 an hour when you were paying the housekeepers on the order of $25 to $28 an hour. So they were basically shedding cash and had negative unit economics, and were also kind of flagrantly violating labor law and treating all these 1099s like W-2 employees, which subsequently came to bite them. But I was looking at this and I was like, man, these guys have incredible war chests. They're able to basically run at a loss forever. And, I will almost certainly be roadkill in the way of these very large trains. So looked to find an exit and like kind of get out of the way of that emerging kind of phenomena in the market, and did so successfully and was glad I did. And the second time around, I was pretty confident I wanted to be the guy with the war chest. Right, like I wanted all the dry powder to go ruin everyone else's day, and that meant I had to go raise venture capital. So, thus began my journey into going from bootstrap founder to kind of VC backed founder, and happy to talk about that. But how I picked the idea was frankly kind of mercenary and very opportunistic. So I didn't have any sort of religion around lawns, right? I don't have some like deep seated passion for grass. They're great. They're good for the bees. There's a lot of reasons to have a lawn, but like I didn't wake up in the morning and think like, man, I just need to like perpetuate the total quantity of lawns in the world. But what I did care about was just starting businesses where it was in a kind of an old school, somewhat boring legacy industry where existing solutions were not sophisticated and where I could just build a much better model. And lawns and frankly many other home service verticals meet that to the T. So I sold Golden Shine. I took a week off, and then I immediately started 3 companies. One was an on-demand personal training company. One was a on-demand pool cleaning company, as it happens. We'll come back to that. And one was an on-demand lawn care company. So I built 3 lead gen funnels, 3 websites, had no actual service providers on the back end of any of these businesses, right? If a customer were to call, you weren't getting your pool cleaned because I didn't have anyone to clean it. But what I was trying to do is validate that I could generate leads at affordable CACs and that there was real volume there. So I built 3 conversion funnels, 3 demand campaigns, threw a ton of ads at each of these websites. Lawns showed the most early traction. I was generating the most leads at the lowest initial CAC. So I kind of unceremoniously just killed the other 2 businesses and went all in on what became Lawn Love. And that was the genesis of it. So a bit formulaic and not this sort of like spiritual, origin for this thing, but a very practical and quantified approach to finding what to work on next. The only thing that I did know, and the kind of bounding box that I had given myself, was it needed to be in home services because I knew that industry well. So the question was just like, let's find the right category within this bigger frame. And, I took a marketer's approach to doing that.
Marketers and design. I now understand a lot. I feel like a lot more about you knowing that you have a design background. I see another dimension, which makes sense. I would say dimension of taste, like you actually have a really strong, specific sense of taste, which I think is an important entrepreneurial trait to a certain
extent. I am opinionated. I don't know if the taste always turns out to be good taste, but I certainly have it. I have opinions about it at least. But no, I think design is massively underrated in entrepreneurial kind of circles. I think Brian Chesky in particular flogs this and is a big believer in the power of it. But like we would spend a lot of time and thought. So we built this full stack field service backend software for Lawn Love. We built way too much software. We probably should have bought more off the shelf, but wrote millions of lines of code and built like routing tools and CRM and literally built Zendesk and customer support workflows and all this stuff. And it was important because we were running this like very scaled dynamic business across 120 cities with like thousands of techs in the field, and you couldn't actually train them because they weren't your employees. So you kind of have to build all this tooling to coordinate the work and track performance and stuff like that without ever seeing them. We had no boots on the ground, no physical presence in any market but San Diego. So it was all like software that powered this business. But in hindsight, we did build a lot, and the maintenance of that software became a big endeavor. But we still cared so much about design that even for these internal tools, we would obsess about UI, flows. Does a support rep in the Philippines find this kind of easy and intuitive? Is it honestly delightful? Do they enjoy the interaction with this thing? And if you don't care about that, you end up building these like soulless interfaces that you force your team to stare at all day long. And there's just something degrading to the human spirit in having to like work every day with ugly products. And so the incremental energy it takes to make it nice was worth every minute of our time. And I carry that ethos through basically everything I build. If it's going to come out of this house, it's going to look as good as I can make it. So yeah, core kind of thing that I very much live my life by.
Well, it makes sense. I think especially you talked about a lot of other competitors that have come up. There's some differentiation that's needed beyond just the exploitation of labor that you mentioned, which every vertical was doing, from Uber to everything else, which was a really interesting time for you to grow up and do, be the king in the ring of your area. A lot of the other ones you mentioned try to have all these verticals, right? The thumbtacks and all these, they had lawn, but they had everything else. Yeah. You were hyper-focused. So I want to dive in a little bit of that. One, you went through Y Combinator, which, is some consider the MIT of startup path and journey, or gives you a kickstart in a way, and the community for kind of the best learning, like Brian Chesky, right, of Airbnb. Take us through a little bit of that path of choosing and going through Y Combinator. What'd you come out with in the end, and how'd that take you to the next level?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan. I found the program to be extremely transformative. Again, I at that point had sold a company and had built a couple businesses by my mid-20s, but I'd never raised a venture. And YC is the original accelerator. Their portfolio's probably 10 times the size of the next second largest accelerator. So kind of unambiguously the king in this arena. But they are. Ultimately, like it was still helmed by Paul Graham at the time, and he's since moved on. It was also Sam Altman's first batch, who he very kindly let me into the program. But they had done a really important job at the time of democratizing, I think, startup wisdom that was otherwise fairly arcane and not very well known, especially as related to raising venture. like venture was this like mystical thing that most founders had no idea how to actually approach. VCs often leveraged this to their advantage and were extremely predatory on founders. And Paul Graham and Y Combinator came out and were like, look, this is how venture fund math works. This is how to pitch VCs. This is how to build scalable, like generational companies. And they have like a disposition toward just obsession above all else, toward growing as quickly as possible, ideally 10% week over week, maybe 20 if you can wrangle it. And if you can do that, it turns out that like that cuts a lot of the cruft off, right? Like that laser focuses their founders on building businesses that are genuinely growing real revenue and or kind of meaningful metrics hyper fast. It forces a certain orientation in their founders that I think serves them long after the program is done, and is one of the reasons why I think I was reading a stat that they've like, somewhere around 10 or 15% of all unicorns have been funded by them now. So it's a crazy program. But they also just like taught you how to raise some VCs. And at this point, YC was no longer, it had been around for some time, right? It was started in 2008. I went through it in 2014. So it very much had a brand. And it was, I think, pretty well understood that if you could get in, you'd raise twice as much money on twice as good terms from, better investors. So it was an intelligence test on your part, whether or not you said yes. It paid for itself many times over. So I applied, initially got an invite to interview, flew up to Mountain View, pitched Paul Graham, Jessica Livingston, Paul Buchheit, all these folks. It's a 10-minute pitch. So it's pretty quick, hard to fit into some totality of who you are and what you're building and why it matters in 10 minutes, but you do your best. It was very adversarial. So it felt like a boxing match in there. And I walked out of there pretty sure I didn't get in. And it turns out I was right. I did not. And I got the, seems interesting, but like come back with traction basically. And that's what I did. I spent the next 6 months, put my head down. I grew revenue very quickly. I think I grew at tiny numbers, but stood up, actually got some real lawn pros on the back end so we could service your home if you booked a lawn care service. First month we did $200. Second month we did like $6. Third month, $1,300. Fourth month, $5,500. Fifth month, like $13,000. So started growing it fast. And I applied again on the last day of applications in 2014 for the summer batch. And Paul Buchheit, the inventor of Gmail, who's a partner there, emailed me and he's like, what have you done since? And I shared the traction, got another interview. Second time around, I interviewed with Sam Altman, Kaiser Eunice, Paul Buchheit, and I think Kat Mignalnik. And it was a totally different tenor. Like it's very, very collegial. They were answering each other's questions and basically did my interview for me, which was very kind of them, and subsequently let me in. It was great. But after that, I raised a couple $1 million from Joe Montana and the Pritzker family and a bunch of other folks in our first seed round for Lawn Love, and we were off to the races.
Wow. What a journey. I mean, like learn by doing in every sense of the way, right? It wasn't just Y Commerce to like read this book, right? And then come back. It was like, go do it and figure out what the customer wants and how to grow, at the speed of what the customer needs to a certain regard. And those customers are a few different areas, right? To some people, VCs are a customer when you're raising. To some people, it's the actual customer paying you revenue, but sounds like you kind of learned it all pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, to YC's credit, this is one thing that they've been adamant about that I think a lot of other accelerators have ignored this advice to their detriment. They do not design the program to optimize for what VCs want to see. Mm-hmm. They are absolutely convinced that if all you do is focus on maniacally growing your company as fast as humanly possible, the capital solves itself. Mm-hmm. And that is true, right? And they repeatedly told us, they're like, okay, here's like how fund math works. Here's how to like approach pitching a little bit, but all of these tactics together, if you execute them flawlessly, will have like a marginal actual effect on your fundraise vis-a-vis you just growing super fast and building a better business. So mostly ignore all of this advice and go build a better business. And only as a second order thing, consider like, oh, how do I concentrate pitches and like strategically structure a raise and all this sort of stuff, right? Yeah. But it was helpful. I think like, it's mostly helpful that they just changed the equilibrium for founders and for startups way beyond the YC kind of nexus, right? They invented the SAFE, and this totally changed terms for every founder who ever raised since, because it's strictly better for common shareholders than the previous priced seed rounds of yore, right? And that was essentially a leverage shift from investors to founders, and was in many cases heralded by them. So I'm grateful for that, and I think most founders who have benefited from those programs should be as well.
100%. And not just founder, I think the whole startup game and startup ecosystem has gained because of that. So you're right. It definitely has changed it for the better.
The thing is it's not zero sum, right? Like old school VC used to think about it as zero sum, right? Like there's a finite 100 points on a cap table. Every incremental point that you own, I do not own, and therefore I should do everything within my mortal and kind of legal power to capture more points on the cap table. I think the problem with that is, yeah, there's 100 points on one cap table, but what if you can like encourage the creation of thousands of extra startups and successful ones? Those are a whole lot more cap tables to go own, 15% of instead of 30% of a smaller number. So if you can inflect the arc of total startup creation broadly, you've not only done something very important for kind of the venture ecosystem, because there's more returns for everyone, but you've also very much done something good for humanity, because I think startups drive a lot of the net innovation in the world.
100%. That's the quality piece, right? If you are making better solutions to problems worth solving, then every point on the cap table actually matters a lot, even more in that regard. Like the cap table just matters more when you're building a better company. Right. And I think that's what Y Combinator has really done, is build great companies through quality. And therefore now you can go scale that and build a lot of great companies. And VCs have taken notice for sure.
Yeah, just encourage more net startup creation, right? Get people off the sidelines. Get great people who have the talents to build something, to believe in themselves. I really like Sam Altman's take on this, by the way. Like, he asked himself and others, what would you do if you had like 100 times more agency? And it is very true that like we kind of move through the world in somewhat linear terms, putting one foot in front of the other, and just accept, tomorrow is going to look the way it does because yesterday looked the way it does. And there's not much that I'm going to do to change that. And we're goldfish that like scale to the size of our tanks, essentially. And it does take like an unusual amount of agency to just change the scale of your tank, right? To suddenly decide to do something 100x bigger. I try to do that more often, but it's tough because it's easy for your brain. I think it's just like not a natural human thing. It's easy for your brain to see like linear steps in a path, but like step change kind of, instead of I'm going to go buy 10 companies in the next 3 years and build to a certain scale, what if we went and just like got all of the existing larger pool companies together and rolled them up into one big $500 million deal tomorrow, right? Like, why don't we try to do that? And, I say this, but I haven't tried to do this yet. So this is like, it feels unnatural because I'm like, well, that's kind of weird. It might not work. Probably wouldn't. And I have a very predictable way to go build something very successful through this other path. So I'm going to do that instead. But I know that Sam Altman would definitely go raise $500 million to go buy the industry and own it from day one. Right. So like, why don't we all have more agency is a question that I am asking both myself and the rest of you.
Let's stair step towards Cabana with that. But I think one piece to bring into that is this 1% better every day, or 1% increase every day, which may lead to 10% in a week, which may lead to that kind of stepwise growth. Easier said than done, right? Like, what does different look like tomorrow than today is what you're saying is what's hard, right? And you have to lead a company, which means you have to lead people through that as well too, not just into something that is brand new that doesn't exist tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think a lot about that. Hiring is basically the single most important job you have as a founder, right? Hiring good people more or less, is the tail of the tape. It's going to spell the success or fate of your business. I think I'm a big believer that you should hire for slope over y-intercept, i.e. bring on really smart people who have the aptitude to learn quickly, and preference that over people who have just like tons of demonstrated prior experience doing the specific thing. And the reason for that is startups are just so dynamic that they're growing so quickly that if you're successful, almost by definition, you're always going to be operating at the edge of your competence, right? Like, you will have earned the privilege to have now grown past your prior skill set and like through your previous experience level to a new frontier that you have not yet experienced. And so, living in a frontier, well, is kind of the definition of stagnation. You've been there for too long. You're not moving fast enough. You're not growing fast enough. I kind of always want to feel like wildly uncomfortable with how little I know about the current environment and kind of problem set that I'm dealing with, because that usually means that I am now breaching some new frontier and have like done something new and different and grown through previous plateaus. But that's true for me and it's true for the team. So hiring high alpha people who are really good at learning new things and are comfortable living in that state of discomfort and ambiguity and kind of living in the nether of, you don't have like a really prescribed clear path. You don't have really clearly articulated playbooks and, ways of doing things. You're mostly inventing it on the fly. Certain people are like dispositionally well suited for that, and many people are not. So it's how do you find those people? How do you remind them that like the state of semi-controlled chaos is a privilege and a champagne problem that is the product of how fast you've been growing and how successful you've been, rather than, a bad thing that we should be worried about, right? But the only way to get that is you got to get people who are like right just kind of disposition, right mindset, sufficiently high kind of intellectual horsepower that they can catch up fast on new frontiers, and then above all, good people, because life's too short to work with people that you don't want to make rich.
100%, and change the world with.
Right.
You speak to something, the playbook piece is often talked about, is used in startup in a variety of ways. It's the whole goal is to figure out what the playbook is, write it, hand it off, so that you can go work on the next thing that needs to be figured out.
Right.
At the frontier level, if you will, right? And I think entrepreneurs often are at if I have to use the playbook I already know, it's not interesting to me. I want to go figure out the things unfigured out yet, to a certain regard. So take us through how you want to do different things differently again, coming out of Lawn Love, still knowing there's so much more meat on the bone in home services to go solve a lot of problems we're solving. How are you coming at it differently towards what eventually became Cabana?
Yeah. So, I mean, just to answer that question real quick, the playbooks are absolutely essential. We read a lot of them, spent a lot of time thinking about how to build better playbooks. And it's not that if you're using a playbook, something's wrong. You should be. But it's more that with any of these, especially like operationally, with any of these solutions that you put in place, what you've basically done is you've earned the right to go to the next order of scale where your current slate of solutions now break, and you get to go reinvent them for the new regime. And that's what I mean by like constantly being at the edge of the frontier in your competence. You do build systems, you do automate things, you do reduce the like unknown to the known, and make it tractable. But that just earns you again the privilege to yeet yourself into a new abyss that you then go figure out. But so how are we doing it differently? It's radically different. So Lawn Love was a marketplace model, essentially an Uber style thing, where we would partner with 1099 kind of contractors in the field. And that worked. Like we grew this business to kind of mid 8 figures a year in revenue, and like had built a solid business that we had a good exit with in 2021. But you still had like a lot of structural challenges to the 1099 labor model. And I've thought about this a lot since. This is not just a Lawn Love problem. This is true for basically any semi-skilled or skilled labor marketplace. You more or less have an adverse selection problem on your labor, where if you are a really good lawn guy, you probably have more jobs than you know what to do with, right? Like think about, I don't know if you have a housekeeper, I don't know if you have like a pool or a pool guy. In most of these cases, you're sticking with someone that you've had forever. They've done a great job. You usually hear one of two stories. You hear, I can never find anyone good. I've been through 19 people. This is a disaster. Or my guy's been with me for 40 years. And this is the fundamental like issue in home services, is that the guy who's been with you for 40 years is the great guy. And it turns out he has no bandwidth because he's had his customers for 40 years. And so he's fully saturated out. And then the other 19 dudes are the ones who have problems retaining their customers for a reason, right? They don't show up on time. They don't communicate. They do bad work, etc. So the problem with a Lawn Love style model, and we did solve a lot of this using the software, is that you're in many cases, you are attracting the frequent flyers who have a hard time retaining customers and therefore need you to bring them new business, right? It's harder to get the guys who already have fully saturated schedules and do amazing work because they don't need you, right? So you either have to catch great pros as they're kind of emerging into the industry, right? And we did a lot of that. And then you saturate their schedule so that they do incredible work for your customers for years. And thankfully, we had lots of those on the platform. Or you have to build tools that take somewhat reliable, somewhat hairy provider bases and try to get them into slightly more palatable, happy customer-facing shapes. And that was an intractable thing. Not fully intractable, but it was an inherently hard thing to do. And you're not allowed to train them. It's a labor law violation to actually tell them how to do their jobs better. So it's really like playing with your hand behind your back. And they do like 4 or 5 jobs a week for you, so they don't care that much if they get kicked off the platform. They're not 40 hours in W-2.
Yeah.
So Cabana has taken a radically different approach. We're W-2 employ all of our team. They're not 1099s. They don't run their own businesses. They are full board, like day one Cabanans. And then we don't just grow through SEO, SEM. We grow through M&A, which is an unusual approach that I think was very non-consensus when we first raised this round in kind of late 23, early 24. And now is becoming radically more consensus in the venture landscape. And I can talk about that too. But in short, we buy great pool cleaning companies, typically from retiring owners who built solid businesses. We then professionalize operations. We help centralize some of the back office, improve route density, kind of deploy some early software into the business. Then we grow these companies organically. Again, 20-year lead gen and growth marketing background. So, built lawandlove.com into a top 3 property in lawn care on Google. And we're doing that again for Cabana. And then lastly, we use these businesses as the bootloader to build vertical software. And we think that this is a radically better approach for vertical SaaS go-to-market in some of these industries, because if you look at many kind of verticals today, the VSaaS race in many cases is already done. Like it's kind of over. In most of the large industries, there's one or more dominant players who've claimed victory, and it's tough as a new entrant to unseat them. Yeah. That is not true in pools. There's no 800-pound gorilla, and it's mostly because it's hyper fragmented. There's 72,000 pool cleaning companies in the country. Average pool guy does like $130K a year in revenue, and is literally a solo operator driving around in the truck all day, what we call a chuck in the truck in the business. You're not going to build a big SaaS company chasing these guys down and trying to sell them software for $50 a month. It just doesn't pencil, right? CACs are high, churn is high. The economics are tough. But what does work is if you invert the model, you buy the companies outright, you embed your own tech into them, you capture 100% of the margin upside. You now have like 0 CAC, 0 churn. And instead of clipping $50 a month in a software subscription, you capture 100% of the margin expansion straight to your own bottom line. And what's more, if you do this well, you haven't just built like a proprietary margin expanding machine. You've built the obvious acquirer of choice for any quality asset that comes to market, because you can consistently run them more efficiently and better at scale than anyone else can, because no one else has built vertical SaaS, because private equity firms don't build software. It's not within their mandate and or their DNA and or their time horizon. And pool guys don't build software. It's not within their DNA. So we are in the rare intersection of being like technologists masquerading as pool guys, with a little bit of private equity flavor thrown in, that allows us to go buy these companies, build software into them, run them more efficiently. And we're playing on a timescale that allows us to make these investments. And we're not trying to find the next exit in 2 to 3 years. And, that totally changes the calculus like most private equity firms kind of struggle with, but that's how it works. But why venture? So this was an interesting dynamic, right? You invested in us, right? So you saw this firsthand. When we first raised, I had so many conversations. We ended up raising from 90 some folks, we raised $6.7 million in an initial seed round. And most of the folks we pitched, if they were angels, they were flexible mandate types, right? They were high net worths, they were family offices. They were easy to work with. They were easy to kind of get on board. But many of the traditional VCs that we pitched, these general partners would say something that sounded like, this is great, you're going to make a ton of money doing it, but I can't do it through the fund because my LPs won't understand. But I would like to invest personally, where you take a personal check. And we got a lot of those checks, and we're grateful to have those individuals on board. But man, it was wild how often it just smelled too different or too weird for folks. And that has changed dramatically. The argument that I basically presented, which I think is bearing out to be true, is two things. One, if you're a VC, you're in the business of finding kind of truths about the world that are not broadly understood, right? Like that is your job, is to like uncover novel kind of secrets and then to trade those secrets, right? To buy those secrets early before they become well-known and no longer secret. And that's where the alpha is.
Yep.
And one of the ways in which there are secrets in the business is like these weird arbitrary demarcations between private equity and venture capital, right? Like these worlds are merging, they're blurring progressively. Like Andreessen Horowitz and whatnot, they're now an RIA. Lightspeed just switched to being an RIA. Like they're changing their mandates so that they can invest in all sorts of stuff, from crypto to buying businesses to, whatever. But for a long time, they were generally viewed as these like very crisply demarcated asset classes, and neither the two shall touch. And so we'd pitch these guys and we're like, yeah, we buy businesses on day one. And they would say, oh, that makes you private equity. And I would say, no, it doesn't. What makes a venture bet is step one, can you use venture dollars to grow at venture rates? Check. Step two, are you growing into a market and a prize and an outcome that's large enough that should you be successful, it's a multi-billion-dollar outcome, it matters for venture fund math, also check. And then three, are you building technology and using it in some way that actually expands your margins, delivers a competitive moat, kind of, grows the business faster and gives you real advantages through a technology lever? Also check, right? So if those three things are true, the bet is definitionally a venture bet. And the fact that we buy companies on day one instead of day 1,000 is just a go-to-market detail, right? We can buy these things and use them to embed our software into them and grow them more quickly. It's also hyper efficient, right? Like you can use these companies, you buy cash flows, and you buy cash flows for, kind of sane multiples, and then you recycle those cash flows into R&D to expand your margins, and then you use those expanded margins and larger cash flows to go buy more cash flows. It's hyper efficient. You're profitable on day one, as you know, right? It's an incredible model. And VC has now figured this out. So Andreessen's now doing these buyouts. Josh Kushner from Thrive just raised $1 billion fund, Thrive Holdings, to do nothing but buy companies and cram AI into them. General Catalyst raised $1.5 billion AI buyout fund. This has now gone from like very fringe and like weird and like, people didn't do it because it smelled like PE, to now every VC, on Sand Hill is like running it this aggressively. So it's been fun to see that evolution though. But that's who we are. That's what we do. And that's kind of why we built it that way.
Amazing. We're going to peel back what is Cabana in a second, but just to touch on this trend from us at Interlock, we saw within our LP base a lot of exited founders like you who were saying, what's next? And a lot of people who had 10 years of running a tech business, scaling it to a point, obviously of higher and higher growth, which is what it happens, right? When you're building a business in that regard.
Yep.
And then saying, okay, starting from scratch is hard. That was 10 years ago that I did the start from scratch part, right? I spent the last 5 years scaling, So one, how do I go take my recent tools and experience and apply that into something? And then also, are there all these new opportunities to take my tech experience into areas that have no tech? And then layer that on with the silver tsunami, and we start just seeing a lot of just our personal friends doing this, right? And so when you came to us with it, and I think you're part of what we did, like a business buyer breakfast, where we just put 20 people together and it's like, what's everyone doing right now? And people were all over the place, whether it's scaling and buying agencies in the ServiceNow area, right? Matt Stoika doing that. Or I'm, there's just like 20 different flavors of people saying, I want to, go from building a tech company to bringing tech to non-tech areas, but scale it at tech, what I'm used to at tech. So for us, like we were like, of course, this feels like the next thing to go do. And of course, Jeremy's going to do it in an industry he already knows, right? Of this home services. So it seemed for us, we were like, of course, this is what Jeremy's going to do next. And of course, we want to be a part of it. So thank you for having us along for the ride. And, it's a chance for us to learn alongside you while you're scaling and growing this too. So thank you.
Glad to have you, man. And excited to be building this with you. I went on a long founder journey after selling Law & Love. So I sold it in 21. I spent a year over there, ran the integration, essentially handcuffed for a year. Left a year and a day later because, LawnStarter already had a perfectly good CEO with Steve. He's an awesome dude, incredibly good at his job. And they didn't need a second one. So it was time to figure out what was next. And I like spent 18 months, not just playing video games and traveling. I, built a AI powered kind of LLM based business that reads, summarizes, and annotates the news to try to break kind of tribalization across, political reading, right? If you ask most people if they know that what they read in media is, lensed and or biased, they will probably say yes. If you ask them if they'd rather be more broadly read across the tribal aisles, they'll also say yes. But as a practical matter, no one wants to go read everything that like Team B or Team A posts, right? But LLMs can do this. You could literally build something that says, tell me everything about Russia, Ukraine. It'll tell you how coverage has evolved, across different sides, right? Like how the left is reporting it, how the right's reporting it, how the center's reporting it. It'll tell you where there's like coverage gaps from left to right and or sensationalism or spin. They literally can do this. It's like an incredible product. It exists. I built it with a buddy out of Airbnb, and then realized a couple things there. One, you're competing against the New York Times and Facebook and Instagram for finite attention spans. So this was a fundamentally hard business to be in. And I also realized something more kind of intimate about myself, which is I'm not a 0 to 1 guy. Like I've 0 to 1 a couple companies. Law Love was fully 0 to 1, but I don't enjoy that part. Like I'm a 1 to N guy. I don't like the like searching for product market fit and flogging hedges and seeing what comes out. Mostly because I like moving very fast, and when you're in the 0 to 1 phase, you can't move too quickly. It's this like statico stutter step of like explore one path, see if there's a there. If not, retreat, explore some other path, and you don't want to run too fast in any one direction because it's probably the wrong path. Whereas like 1 to N games, you're on the right path. Like with Cabana, industry is obvious. Been around for a couple hundred years. Pool cleaning is not going anywhere. It's non-cyclical, goes through every macro environment. Once you have a pool, you kind of got to keep cleaning it, right? But it's purely and singularly an execution game where we just have to go build a better business and the marketing channels and the conversion funnels and the playbooks and the team and the software to go enable this at scale, which people haven't done before. And we're happy to go eat that. And it doesn't feel like there's like any big novel technical risk or fundamental laws of physics that we're going to have to solve for in order to go build our business. We're not in search of a business model. The business model is obvious. It's like, can we just build a much better service? Can we attract and retain talent better? Can we buy really good companies? Can we underwrite them well? Can we manage a capital stack intelligently? These are all like not easy things to do, but they're thoroughly, known things. Yeah. So I like to run fast at known quantities where I just have to be better than the average player, rather than go figure out like if a customer wants this novel thing that no one on planet Earth might actually need, right? Like that's solutions in search of problems and all that is like not my sweet spot. So that being said, most great companies go through a 0 to 1, and some people are like 0 to 1 specialists and they love that phase. It is actually their favorite part. And once it gets to like the scale game, they hand it off to people like me, and they go back in search of the new. But that's not me. So I figured that out about myself, and I realized, man, you might not have set out to be a home services guy, but you've now spent 15 years developing a very specific set of skills that afford you a whole lot of advantages on these things. So maybe go do that. So that's how we got back to it.
Amazing. Well, let's peel back what the Cabana experience is. And by the way, I don't know if I ever told you, I think I've told you this. I was a pool boy during college. It was a part-time job I had while in community college.
My God.
I cleaned my pool, my grandparents, like everyone who was on the route of my pool guy, he hired me for Fridays and then Thursday, Fridays, and then Wednesday, Thursday, Fridays. And,
amazing.
He was at it for 30, 40 years, try to get his son into the business so that he could hand it off to the son. I don't think that ever happened. Right. So shout out to John of Simi Valley, who ran his pool route, until he didn't. So that's the story.
Amazing, dude. I don't hear that often. Glad to hear you've got chlorine in the old veins.
Yep. Exactly. I loved it. It was just so fun to like spend the day outside, and to be able to look at you start a pool, looks dirty, you step back, looks clean. You're like, I did something, on to the next,
right.
Like really like it feels really great. Just the same as like putting up a wall or painting, so there's a lot to be said around that. So in the end of the day, the job guy has to get done, but like, what's the experience like and how do you optimize that beyond that job?
Yeah, I mean, I love that you said that you start, it looks dirty, and you end and it looks clear. That's one of the things I love most about pools, right? Like, so I've built these marketplace businesses and, house cleaning and carpets and windows kind of in home. And then I built it with lawns. And what I learned, and then again with pools, and what I learned there is there's basically these different home service verticals all look kind of similar on their face, right? You alluded to how vertically focused we are and how we don't try to boil the ocean and do all these different kind of home service categories all at once. And one of the reasons for that is if you look at them in depth, I mean, at a high level, yeah, sure, you're quoting a customer, you're scheduling a job, you're dispatching a pro, you're completing the service, you're billing the customer, done deal. Like those are the mechanics of the thing. But each of these industries has a ton of nuance. Like lawns are very weather sensitive because you can't mow wet grass or you're going to rut the yard and have to resod someone's backyard, which is extremely expensive, right? Pools are heavily sensitive to kind of algae growth and temperature and chemicals and all this stuff, right? There's a lot more complexity around the pool pad and the pumps and the filters and the heaters and the plumbing. And so like each of these things have a lot of nuance when you actually get into them. But one of the things that's most interesting is just how variable notions around quality are from market to market. So in maid service, for example, there's no standard, right? Like your grandmother's definition of a clean home, it might be radically different than yours if you're like a bachelor or, some college kid. And so like calibrating that and helping, design process so that customers were always satisfied was just like a Herculean task, because half of your customers would find that you were too slow because you were paying attention and you were detail oriented. The other half would find that you were too fast and non-attentive enough to the details because you were efficiency oriented. And like, there's no winning, right? It was a really tough model. You also have like other logistics challenges. It's in home. So you've got like way more higher trust barriers, harder logistically because you got to break the threshold of the home. Customer has to be home for a 1 hour arrival window instead of being able to show up anytime that day. Pools are binary, man. It's clear or it's not clear. That's a beautiful thing. Like it's hard for the customer to be like, oh my God, the pool is like
half clear.
Like if it's half clear, they're right. You failed to do your job. Right. And like, I just like that there's like the success criteria is very obvious. And it's not true for all home service verticals. Some of them can be a lot more nuanced. Lawn lives somewhere between house cleaning and pools. Like the grass is either mowed or not, but maybe they'd be mad because you didn't hand weed the planter beds and you used selective herbicide, or you didn't edge correctly or whatever, or you mowed to like slightly the wrong height because they might have a different height preference on how they cut the grass, right? Those are all things. Again, pool's pretty binary. So one of the things I love about it, it does make for a more scalable business if you have more homogenous services that are easier to build playbooks around, I think.
Yeah. So what are some of the things you brought to it beyond the pool is clear to optimize, I would say, how a business scales to be the largest national brand?
Well, so the long-term play is we just build a full suite of field service software behind everything, right? There are existing kind of off-the-shelf SaaS solutions in pools. Most of them are pretty small. And none of them are really built for a scaled player, right? They're all built for single polar kind of chuck in a truck style businesses on up to maybe 500 pools. 1,000 would be pushing it. They're not built for 20,000 pools. They're not built for multi-state. They have no multi-region support. They have very little to no kind of good work order inventory management. So just building your own software that solves for your own idiosyncratic problems and automates away a lot of the headaches and kind of issues that bedevil the average business owner, I think goes a long way. But we've also built cool stuff like we built a custom ML model that looks at satellite imagery when you get a quote, and we find the pool in your backyard and we measure the circumference and triangulate the depth, and we can now give you a quote sight unseen without you actually physically talking to a human, right? Like you just punch in an address, bang, here's how big your pool is, here's your price. Doesn't exist in the industry, and we built it in like a month. So it's a lot of stuff like that we think we can continue to build out to give us like either a better customer experience or unlock the potential of our techs and help them be better in the field and kind of continue to coach and train and educate them, or drive more efficiency and kind of margin expansion, or all three. So most of the stuff we build is going to be oriented toward those three ends, or integrate companies better. Like nobody's ever built software in pool cleaning imagining that you're going to buy 10 businesses in, a year or a month or whatever, right? Like,
Yeah.
like integrations are an afterthought if considered at all. We're building it, integration friendly from day one, under the premise that we're always going to be introducing new customers to Cabana because we're going to be buying a lot of companies. So that's an enormous advantage that we can exploit, given that we can actually build software.
Okay, so take us through, what are some things you've learned through integrating companies, and even where I think you're mostly been in Southern California to date,
Right.
because you found so much opportunity in just SoCal and so many companies. They're like, yeah, what are some learnings and how are you extrapolating that?
Oh man, yeah. So we're learning a lot. We're just over a year old. We've bought 9 companies. We've gone from 0 to 50 employees in that time. Integration is tough, and it's something that we are getting better at. I think integrating companies is actually where most private equity roll-ups go to die. And the reason for this is it's just an inherently difficult thing to take a legacy business that you've often bought from a retiring owner who's run it for 40 some years and has a very specific and discrete way of doing things. And they have a team that they've hired who are loyal to them and, know them well and like working for them, presumably. And then you come in and you're like, hi there, we've bought this business. You work for us now. Here's why you should be excited about this new future. And you have to do that very well. And we've spent a good time and a good amount of time and a lot of energy building the onboarding for the teams, because they're where it all starts and ends, right? If you walk out your front door, no amount of like ML powered quoting is going to make a difference if your pool's green, right? If you walk out your back door, your pool's green, right? It starts and ends with the techs in the field and the repair techs and the service managers. And so building really slick onboarding to help them understand, or just like educational onboarding to help them understand why you exist, what this means for their careers, why you're not just going to come in and make a bunch of changes and make their lives harder and, blow up a bunch of stuff that you don't understand. Like that all goes a long way in building trust and eventually, retaining folks. I think we've been very lucky and deliberate in this effort so far. Of all the companies we've bought, 9 of them, we've lost 1 employee.
Wow.
Yeah, 1 employee. The rest are all with us and happily and doing incredible work. So we're I think very proud of that, and I think have done a pretty good job landing that plane. But man, it's not like that's the tip of the iceberg, or that's the duck above the water. Below the water is the the feet furiously paddling to get billing systems cut over, because you find out after the fact that 25% of these customers don't have an email address and received paper invoices in the mail, and you have not accounted for this. So now you got to figure out how you paper invoice dozens of half 100 customers, right? So like it's countless things like that are just like, you got to react. And we've been doing this without a playbook, so we're writing the playbook as we're doing it. And that's just like, that's a naturally tough thing. And I'm extremely proud of the Cabana team for having held through that and executed so well against what are genuinely tough challenges. But like customer retention is way above kind of norms for post integration. Team retention is extremely high, and we're only going to get better at it. So excited for like the deals to come. But it is nevertheless a big learning, because with every integration, you're like, oh, we didn't even consider this. We didn't consider that customers wouldn't have an email address, because like coming from tech land, that's unconscionable. Like, how do you talk to them? Right. But in pools, you might not have they might have a phone number, and it might be a landline. So you can't even text them. Right. It's a literal landline in some like 90-year-old woman's home, but she's got a pool and you want to service it. So you got to figure it out. So that's the game.
That is the game. And luckily, with 9 acquisitions and probably countless more you've looked at under the hood to see what's right and wrong, you're learning a lot of like what makes a business in this industry. And to have done that in about a year, already have had kind of these 9 shots on goal, which is what you're going to continue to do, right? You're going to continue to scale through acquisition. So, you're learning to flex that muscle really well of what are we getting when we are acquiring this, and how do we as rapidly as possible integrate them into the Cabana model.
Yeah, definitely. Like the beautiful thing about M&A driven models, which I learned, it's actually like we discovered it as we were going, is that in some ways you get to like parachute into a parallel universe where you made different decisions. And when you're running a normal startup, right, you go down this path, you hit these crossroads, you decide to go, left path, right path. You never really get to go back and interrogate what would have happened if I did the other thing.
Yeah.
When you buy companies, you get to see, oh, these guys made the opposite decision. This is how it's working. And then you get to like triangulate the best of all decisions into your own internal operating model. So if you do it well, every addition to your team and your roster and your kind of fold teaches you something that you then democratize across the entire rest of the company, and you benefit from it. So you should, much like the Borg, just get smarter as you get bigger. And I know like I probably shouldn't compare us to the Borg because that's soulless and largely comprised of automatons, but we are the Borg in terms of our rapidly accelerating learnings, but otherwise very human.
100%. And you're the happy Borg. Cabana always is like, that's where you want to be, right? That's where the party is, so bring the Cabana Borg to the whole nation.
Right.
People want that.
A vacation in your own backyard, sunscreen, chlorine, like suntans. Who doesn't like the pool? That's what I love about pools. Like it's a joy-making device. Like no one swims angrily. Like it's fun to be in a pool. A pool is like associated with having a good time and relaxing and vacation. And it's fun to bring more of that joy to the world if we're successful. And I like that. I like that feature of the business a lot. 100%. Lawns are cool too, but I don't know, like people don't play in their lawns as joyfully as they swim in their pools. So we're winning on that equation.
True. And people view mowing their lawn as a chore to a certain regard. No one's talked about with that pool. Pool's like, can't wait to jump in, and like, I don't know. So yes, there's a lot more to it for sure.
Cleaning it is a chore. Like that we will take off your plate so that you can only focus on the jumping in part. That's why we're here.
100%. Well, we're super excited for Cabana's continued growth. Let me know when you're in my neighborhood, or I'll just make the intro to my pool guy so we can get that going now.
Please.
Yes, 100%.
Amazing.
So just like pools, everyone loves a good taco. And this being the Tacos and Tech podcast, you being in San Diego a long time, being a part of a taco culture, we got to know, do you have a favorite taco spot or multiple?
I think one can say I had a favorite taco spot. There was a place called Salud in Barrio Logan that had just elite tacos. They were amazing. I believe they met a untimely demise circa COVID times, which was sad to see. Yeah,
but they were
had
a line out their door too, Like,
oh man, yeah, they were a neighborhood staple. They were incredible. Absent Salud, what I actually like? This is probably a slightly controversial answer, but I'm a fan of Puesto.
Oh,
like
love Puesto.
Puesto is like, I know that like it's kind of chainy and there's like 5 or 6 of them in town, but they do that thing where they caramelize the cheese on the bottom of the tortilla, and then it creates a vapor barrier so your tortilla doesn't split open in your hands, and you get like caramelized melted cheese on it. This is just like obviously a superior way to produce a taco, and I don't understand why everyone doesn't do this, but it is incredible, and that's got to be probably my favorite taco in town.
Ooh, great one. And having just had coffee with Alex Adler yesterday of Puesto, there will be some future things happening between Puesto and the Tacos and Tech podcast. So stay tuned around that. But at the very least, Alex will be on a up and coming podcast here soon, because it's been a family run, labor of love, bootstrap business in San Diego that has figured out scale of some sorts and is going in a few veins coming up here too as well. So
amazing.
Yeah.
Well, glad Alex did his thing, and happy to have laid him up like that.
Great job there. I love Puesto as well. I just love the obviously quality. Their event spaces are really fun to throw stuff at. We do a bunch of events there, and then they have a variety of tacos, from so many different, kinds that you can try and taste. They remind me of like city tacos in their sense to how broad the menu is. Just doing it at a sit down level,
Right.
So
a little more pinkies out. That's right.
Yeah, exactly. So no, it's a great one. Awesome. Salute is a great one. I also always have my pour one out for. Mine was Bull Taco, which they used to have like 6 to 8 locations, and they slowly all shut down. The last one in San Diego was at like Cardiff Campground, but was a good memory. So
Never had the pleasure. I guess that one will fade into the mist of what once was and could have been. But
yes,
there'll be many more. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, we will. I don't think Salud has been mentioned before, so I'll make sure. I'm gonna go back and check our taco database that we keep here on the
Dude,
podcast.
they're a staple. Like
I
they're
know. I
the
agree.
thick tortillas, the grungy bathroom that looks like it was like the epicenter of where heroin was invented. It was amazing. It was great.
Yes. Well, Jeremy, it's been really fun to chat, get to know a bit more of your background, your story, and how you're doing things at a whole nother level here with Cabana. So thanks for the time, and let's go make some more pools clean.
Yes, sir. Yeah, great chatting, Neal. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks. Cheers.
Startups get the party started. Startups get the party. Startups get the party started. You want tech and tacos, tacos and tech. You know we got tacos and tech is on smash. For the green guacamole. Keep accountants counting beans. Contador cuentan frijoles. Founders trying to raise some queso. La vida San Diego. School of rapping fire. Tortillas round jalapenos. In these modern times of craft beer and coffee. My coding yoga posse. Fold the body. Origami. We be surfing Coronado. Eating tacos el gordo. The tacos stand in puesto. Lucha libre and sombrero. Gotta shout out Tecos Daniels by the ocean. Watch the sunset. La Jolla Shores. Entrepreneurs trying to get funded. When San Diego Startup Week is popping in the summer. Oceanside to Tijuana. SD be full of hustlers. From couch surfing to penthouses right on the beach. Tech leaders who believe stars are within reach. We interviewing founders who be shooting for the moon. Hashtag SD Tecos with your host, Neal Bloom. Come on! Startups get the party. Startups get the party started. Startups get the party. Startups get the party started. Startups get the party. Startups get the party started. You want tech and tacos, tacos and tech. You know we got it. Hey. Startups get the